In the quietest hours of the day, when the world finally lowers its voice, the mind has a strange habit of becoming brighter. Thoughts drift in like soft lanterns. Questions you never had time to ask suddenly feel important. And somewhere beneath all of that thinking, there is a simpler need: to feel understood, to feel settled, to feel like your way of being in the world makes sense. Tonight, we are not going to treat introversion and extroversion like labels, not shy versus loud, not people-person versus loner. Instead, we will explore something more accurate, more compassionate, and, in a way, more beautiful. The idea that personality is partly the art of arousal regulation, how your nervous system handles stimulation, how your brain looks for balance, how your chemistry searches for just enough. Hello there, and welcome to the RareMindset channel. I'm so glad you found your way here. Make yourself comfortable as you listen. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw unclench. If your eyes want to close, you can allow that. If you prefer to keep them open, that is fine too. There is nothing you need to do perfectly. This is a slow documentary for the sleeping mind. A calm walk through a vast library of psychology, where each shelf holds a different truth about human nature. Across the next chapters, we will move through classic theories like Hans Eysenk's cortical arousal model and modern frameworks like the Big Five, sometimes called Ocean. We will visit neuroscience too: dopamine pathways, acetylcholine calm, the amygdala's watchfulness, the prefrontal cortex where planning and reflection live. And we will do it gently, in a way that keeps your mind interested while your body eases toward rest. As you listen, you might recognize yourself, or you might recognize someone you love, a partner who comes alive in a crowd, a friend who disappears for days and returns with warmth intact, a colleague who thinks best out loud, another who thinks best in silence. None of these patterns are moral. None of them are failures. They are simply nervous systems trying to find their optimal level of stimulation, trying to stay regulated, trying to stay safe. So tonight, if you notice your thoughts wandering, that is not a problem. That is part of the experience. Let the information wash over you. Keep what feels useful. Let the rest float past like a page you do not need to memorize. And now, as we step into the first chapter, imagine a quiet sound in the distance. The soft turn of a page, the hush of a library door closing, a gentle reminder that you are entering deeper territory. Chapter 1. The Biological Blueprint. Personality begins earlier than we like to admit, earlier than our first job, earlier than our first heartbreak, earlier even than our first memory. Before we become a type socially, we are already a nervous system biologically. And one of the most soothing truths in psychology is that many of your preferences are not character flaws. They are calibrations. Your brain, your chemistry, your sensory gates, quietly deciding what feels like too much and what feels like not enough. This chapter is about the blueprint, the physical and chemical foundations that nudge someone toward the introverted end of the spectrum, or the extroverted end, or the wide, flexible middle. Not as destiny, not as a cage, but as a starting temperature, a baseline rhythm, a home base your body returns to. Consider first a small experiment that feels almost playful but carries a serious message: the lemon juice experiment and the sensitivity of the RAS. Researchers have found something strangely specific. When a drop of lemon juice is placed on the tongue, introverts on average tend to salivate more than extroverts. It sounds like a trivia fact, but it points toward a deep mechanism. The difference is not really in taste buds. It is in the way the brain amplifies stimulation. A key player here is the reticular activating system, or RAS, a network that helps regulate alertness and how strongly we react to sensory input. If your RAS is more sensitive, the world arrives louder, brighter, sharper. The sourness of a lemon becomes a bigger event. And if the body reacts more strongly to small sensory signals, then personality begins to look less like an attitude and more like physiology, a system managing intensity. Beyond taste, this opens a wider idea. Some brains live closer to the edge of enough. Others need more signal to feel engaged. the dopamine threshold, and the calm pull of acetylcholine. When people talk about extroverts, they often talk about confidence, charisma, social boldness. But neuroscience offers a quieter explanation. Many studies suggest that extroverts are more strongly rewarded by dopamine surges, especially in a network involving the nucleus accumbens, often described as part of the brain's reward circuitry. Social risk, novelty, fast-paced interaction, even a lively room can feel like a clean spark of pleasure. Not because extroverts are shallow, but because their system registers those experiences as energizing. Introverts do not necessarily have less dopamine. The difference is in sensitivity and threshold. For an introvert, the same stimulation can tip from pleasant into overwhelming more quickly. Introverts often lean more on acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter linked to calm focus, internal reflection, and steady attention. Quiet work, deep reading, gentle solitude. These are not avoidance. They can be genuine biochemical nourishment. This brings us to a fascinating difference in how information travels through the brain. Long pathways, short pathways, and the feeling of "give me a moment." Neuroimaging research suggests that extroverts and introverts may process incoming information along different neural routes. For many extroverts, stimuli can move through a shorter, more direct pathway, flowing through regions tied closely to immediate sensory experience. What is seen, touched, tasted, heard. The response can arrive quickly, as if the brain says, "I have enough data. Let's go." For many introverts, the pathway is longer and more layered. Information may travel through areas associated with self-reflection and internal awareness, like the right insula, then through language planning regions like Broca's area, and onward into the frontal lobes, where evaluation and future thinking occur. This does not make introverts slow. It makes them thorough. It is why some introverts pause before answering. They are not hesitating socially. They are processing neurologically, running the moment through more checkpoints, like a careful librarian verifying a rare book before shelving it. And once you see that, you can understand why stimulation affects the baseline differently. Eysink's cortical arousal theory and the search for optimal. Hans Eysenck proposed a model that still echoes through personality science. The cortical arousal theory suggests that introverts tend to have a higher baseline level of arousal in the cortex. Not anxiety exactly, but a kind of mental brightness, a background hum of alertness. In a quiet room, their system may already be near its optimal point. Add too much noise, too many faces, too many interruptions, and it can feel like the mind is redlining. Calm becomes a form of regulation. Extroverts, by contrast, are often described as having a lower baseline arousal. Quiet can feel understimulating, like a radio turned down too far. Activity, novelty, and social interaction may bring them up toward the sweet spot. In this view, neither introverts nor extroverts are better. They are simply steering toward the same goal, an optimal level of arousal. They just begin from different starting points. Now, deep in the brain, there is a system that decides what is safe, what is intense, and what needs attention right now. The amygdala's vigilance and the social world as stimulus. The amygdala is sometimes called the brain's alarm system. It helps scan for threats, but threat does not have to mean danger in a dramatic sense. It can also mean intensity, uncertainty, too many unknown variables at once. Some studies suggest that introverts often show a more reactive amygdala response to certain forms of stimulation, including social novelty. A room full of strangers can register as a high-information environment. Unfamiliar faces, unpredictable interactions, shifting social cues. The introverted nervous system may treat that as costly, and the body may subtly prepare to retreat, to conserve. For extroverts, the amygdala may respond with less alarm and more curiosity, allowing the same environment to feel like possibility instead of pressure. This is one reason why an introvert can be perfectly socially skilled and still feel drained afterward. The skill is not the issue, the intensity is. Consider also the brain region that helps you choose your words carefully and wonder about consequences before you act. prefrontal cortex thickness, and the architecture of contemplation. MRI research has found in some studies that introverts tend to show thicker gray matter in parts of the prefrontal cortex, a region involved in abstract thought, decision-making, planning, and self-regulation. Gray matter is not a measure of virtue, but it can reflect how heavily a system leans on certain functions. A thicker prefrontal landscape may support a natural tendency to simulate outcomes, to consider alternatives, to notice nuance. This can look like wisdom. It can also look like overthinking, especially when the environment is loud or demanding. The mind runs scenario after scenario, not because it wants to suffer, but because it is built to evaluate. Extroverts, who often act with quicker sensory-to-action loops, may rely less on extended prefrontal processing in the moment, and more on learning through movement, conversation, and real-time feedback. And the difference is not only in structure, it can appear in the very flow of blood and metabolic energy. Blood flow patterns and the direction of attention. A landmark line of research using brain imaging observed that introverts often show increased blood flow in frontal regions and the anterior thalamus, areas linked to internal processing, memory integration, and problem solving. It is as if energy is being routed toward inner narrative, quiet calculation, and reflective synthesis. Extroverts, in contrast, often show more blood flow toward posterior regions, areas that help process sensory information coming in from the outside world. This does not mean extroverts are less intelligent or introverts are more intellectual. It simply suggests a different default orientation. Introverts may spend more energy maintaining an internal model of reality. Extroverts may spend more energy engaging the external landscape as it unfolds. In everyday life, this can feel like the difference between living with a rich internal soundtrack versus living with the volume turned outward, tuned to the room, the crowd, the horizon. Some of these tendencies may also be influenced by a small piece of genetic code, quietly shaping how rewarding novelty feels. The DRD4 gene and the chemistry of novelty-seeking. Personality is never purely genetic, but genes can tilt the starting point. One genetic marker often discussed is a variation of the DRD4 gene, sometimes nicknamed the thrill-seeking gene, because it affects dopamine signaling. Certain variants, including the commonly cited 7R variant, have been associated in some research with novelty-seeking behavior and higher extroverted tendencies. If dopamine rewards you strongly for exploring the unknown, you may naturally reach for new experiences, new people, new environments. You might feel more alive when the map is not fully drawn. If novelty is less chemically rewarding, you might prefer depth over width, familiarity over constant change, a smaller circle with stronger roots. This is not fate, and it is not an excuse. It is simply one more piece of evidence that the personality spectrum is not imaginary. It is embodied. Now we move from reward to regulation, from excitement to calming. There is a nerve that wanders through the body like a quiet river. Vagus nerve tone and the art of self-soothing. The vagus nerve is a major pathway of the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest side of the body's regulation. Vagal tone refers to how effectively this system can slow the heart, settle the breath, and return the body to baseline after stress. Research in psychophysiology suggests that differences in vagal tone can influence how people recover from stimulation. Many introverts appear to have a style of regulation that leans toward internal soothing, calming down alone, finding steadiness in quiet routines, resetting through solitude. Many extroverts, meanwhile, often regulate through co-regulation. Their nervous system settles when it is synchronized with others, through conversation, laughter, shared activity, and emotional feedback. This is why telling an extrovert to just be alone and calm down can feel like removing their charging cable. And telling an introvert to just mingle and you'll feel better can feel like adding noise to an already full system. And yet, even with biology, the story does not end in a fixed identity. The brain remains a living, changing organ. neuroplasticity and the spectrum as a movable dot, not a prison. Biology gives you a home base, but it does not lock the doors. Neuroplasticity means the brain can adapt through experience. An introvert can learn to tolerate high-stimulation environments through gradual exposure, especially when the context feels meaningful, safe, and chosen. An extrovert can learn to build comfort with quiet, to strengthen attention, to discover that stillness is not emptiness. But even as we grow, many people notice a truth that is both simple and relieving. We can stretch. We can perform. We can rise to meet life's demands. And still, we tend to recover in the way our nervous system prefers. Introverts often restore through acetylcholine-driven calm, solitude, deep focus, nature, reading, music. Extroverts often restore through dopamine and oxytocin-rich connection, friendly voices, shared plans, social warmth. Growth is real. Flexibility is real. And so is the quiet wisdom of returning to what truly replenishes you. As this chapter closes, let the idea settle gently in your mind. Personality is not just a set of habits. It is a relationship between your brain and stimulation, between your chemistry and your environment, between your baseline arousal and the world's volume. And when you understand that, self-judgment can soften into self-knowledge. Chapter 2: The Social Battery and Energy Exchange. If Chapter 1 was about the blueprint, the wiring and chemistry, then Chapter 2 is about what it feels like to live inside that wiring on an ordinary day. Because personality is not only what you prefer, it's also what you pay for, in energy, in attention, in recovery time. When people say my social battery is low, they're using a metaphor, but it's a surprisingly accurate one. The nervous system spends resources to track faces, interpret tone, monitor timing, decide what to say, and continuously recalibrate. The cost is not equal for everyone. For some, social contact is a charger. For others, it's a bright light, warm and lovely, but exhausting to stare into for too long. The introvert hangover and cognitive depletion. Many introverts recognize a specific aftermath. The moment after a long social day when words feel heavy, thinking feels slow, and even simple sensory input, bright lights, background music, a question from a loved one, can feel oddly intense. Psychologists sometimes describe this as cognitive depletion, and people casually call it an introvert hangover. It isn't a sickness, and it isn't weakness. It's the nervous system signaling overload. When stimulation stays high for too long, stress hormones like cortisol may remain elevated, and the brain's executive resources get used up. The result can feel like a mental fog, a quiet shutdown, as if the mind is requesting a dimmer room. In that state, solitude isn't rejection, it's repair, a return to baseline. Beyond this, it helps to know that not everyone recharges the same way. Social parasympathetic recovery and the extrovert's reset. For many extroverts, stress doesn't always dissolve in silence. It dissolves in connection. Researchers have long noted that social interaction can trigger neurochemical buffers, like dopamine and often oxytocin, that soften the impact of cortisol. An extrovert may finish a difficult day and feel their body settle only after talking, laughing, or being physically present with someone they trust. It can look like they are seeking stimulation, but on the inside, they are seeking regulation. Their nervous system finds rhythm through other nervous systems. A friendly conversation becomes a kind of parasympathetic signal. You are safe, you are held, you are part of something. Where an introvert may exhale most deeply alone, an extrovert may exhale most deeply in company. This brings us to a hidden cost that many people never name, even though they feel it daily. The cost of self-monitoring and the doubled computational load. Self-monitoring is the quiet act of adjusting yourself to fit the room, choosing the right facial expression, the right volume, the right amount of enthusiasm, the right timing. Everyone does it because humans are social mammals. But introverts often experience high-level self-monitoring as especially draining, not because they are less skilled, but because they are often running two heavy processes at once. They're tracking the external environment, while also tracking their internal environment. Thoughts, impressions, subtle emotional signals meaning beneath words. That double stream raises the brain's computational load. Extroverts may self-monitor too, but often with a more intuitive, rapid feedback style, like steering a bicycle by feel. Introverts can steer beautifully as well, but they may be doing it while also reading the map, evaluating the weather, and planning the next 5 turns. And that is why the type of conversation matters as much as the presence of conversation. Deep talk, small talk, and why some words feel heavier than others. Small talk can look simple from the outside. A few polite questions, a few practiced smiles, but psychologically, small talk is often phatic communication, social grooming that establishes safety and familiarity. For many introverts, that early layer can feel like cognitive static, a lot of output with little internal reward. Their mind wants meaning, pattern, substance, and until it gets there, the energy spent can feel poorly exchanged, like paying a high price for a low-nutrition meal. Deep conversation, on the other hand, often feels oddly restorative to introverts. When the topic becomes real, values, ideas, honest stories, the long pathway brain finally gets to do what it does best. The same social setting that would drain them in shallow waves can suddenly feel engaging in deep water. Now imagine trying to do that kind of deep processing while the environment keeps interrupting you. The open office paradox and the nervous system on alert. Modern workplaces often celebrate openness. Fewer walls, more collaboration, more spontaneous interaction. For many extroverts, this feels alive and efficient, like thinking happens in the air between people. But studies on attention and productivity suggest that constant background noise and interruption carry a cognitive cost, especially for those who are more stimulus sensitive. For an introvert, the open office can trigger low-level hypervigilance, the subtle readiness to be interrupted, watched, addressed, pulled into conversation. Even when nothing is happening, the nervous system stays partly braced. It's like trying to read a complex book while someone occasionally taps your shoulder, lightly, politely, but often. After hours of that, the body may feel strangely tired, not from the workload itself, but from the sustained alertness around it. And beneath these daily experiences, there may be an older story, one shaped by evolution, social foraging theory, and 2 different appetites. Evolutionary psychologists sometimes describe extroverts as social foragers. Like ancestors scanning for fruit trees, extroverts scan for social reward, signals of opportunity, alliance, novelty, shared excitement. When they find it, their system lights up. When they don't, a certain boredom or restlessness can appear, not as drama, but as understimulation. Introverts can feel reward too, but their appetite often looks different, more like grazing in a concentrated, familiar field. A few deep relationships, a small circle with strong trust, enough social nutrition to feel connected without needing frequent new input. Neither strategy is superior. Each is a different way of managing risk, energy, and belonging. Still, no human nervous system can live at one extreme forever. The rebound effect and the quiet return of social hunger. Even the most solitude-loving introvert may notice something after long isolation, a gentle ache for contact. Not always for crowds, but for a voice, a familiar presence, a reminder that they are seen. This is sometimes called a rebound effect. It reflects something basic in our species. Connection is part of regulation. The difference is not whether we need others, but when we reach saturation. Introverts often reach social saturation sooner, needing breaks to downshift. Extroverts often reach isolation saturation sooner, needing contact to upshift. It's like 2 clocks that measure the same resource in different units. Both are valid. Both are human. As the world becomes more digital, many people discover a third path between solitude and social intensity. Digital socialization and the relief of asynchronous connection. Texting, email, messaging. These forms of communication are asynchronous. They leave space between receiving and responding. For many introverts, that space is not awkward. It is oxygen. It allows the brain to run its longer processing route without the pressure of immediate performance. You can read, reflect, choose your words, and respond when your system is ready. Extroverts may enjoy digital contact too, but often feel it lacks the full-body feedback they crave. Tone, timing, laughter, microexpressions, the energy of a shared room. To an extrovert, text can feel like eating alone with the TV on. Technically input, but not quite nourishment. To an introvert, text can feel like a perfectly portioned meal, quiet, controlled, and satisfying. And when the social battery runs low in a real-world gathering, some people develop a strategy so elegant it almost feels like folklore. The Irish exit and protecting the last drops of energy. Many introverts have done it, leaving a party quietly without the long goodbye tour. This isn't rudeness in its pure form. Often, it's nervous system math. Saying goodbye requires a series of mini interactions, each one a new start, a new face, a new emotional tone. When the battery is near empty, those starts and stops can feel like lifting a heavy weight repeatedly. The Irish exit protects the last drops of regulation. It prevents the final overload that might turn exhaustion into irritability or shutdown. Psychologists might describe it as maintaining autonomy over stimulation. And in a compassionate view, it's simply someone choosing to leave while they can still remember the night with warmth, instead of leaving when their system collapses. This same anticipatory logic shows up even before the social event begins. The Sunday scaries and the mind's habit of pre-spending energy. Some introverts notice a particular tension on Sunday evening, especially if Monday will bring meetings, presentations, open offices, or heavy social demands. The mind begins to simulate, to plan, to pre-process. And while planning can be helpful, it can also become anticipatory fatigue. The brain spends energy as if the event has already started. Researchers link this to how strongly some people engage their prefrontal cortex for future simulation, imagining conversations, rehearsing responses, predicting outcomes. It's not always anxiety about judgment. Sometimes it's simply the nervous system preparing for intensity. A gentle approach here is to recognize what's happening. Your mind is trying to protect you by planning, and then to offer it a softer message. We will handle it one moment at a time. Chapter 3: Evolutionary ROOTS and Survival STRATGIS. If you zoom far enough out, personality stops looking like a preference and starts looking like an ecosystem. Nature rarely builds only one kind of mind. Diversity is a survival strategy. In early human groups, it wasn't useful for everyone to be bold. It also wasn't useful for everyone to be cautious. A tribe made of only explorers might walk into danger. A tribe made of only sentinels might never discover new resources. So imagine for a moment an ancient camp at the edge of a forest. A fire, low voices, the night full of listening. Within that group, you can almost feel why both introversion and extroversion remained in the gene pool. Vigilance and exploration as complementary roles. One way to frame the spectrum is vigilance versus exploration. Extroverted traits, novelty-seeking, social boldness, risk tolerance, help groups expand. New hunting grounds, new alliances, new mates, new solutions. Introverted traits, heightened sensitivity, careful observation, hesitation before action, helped groups survive. Noticing subtle changes in the environment, detecting threat, tracking social tension before it erupted. The extrovert moved toward the unknown. The introvert measured it. And between them, the tribe didn't just live, it adapted. In modern life, this can look like one person who says, "Let's try it," and another who says, "Let's think it through." Neither is fear. Neither is recklessness. It's an ancient division of labor inside the human mind. In the animal kingdom, this pattern repeats in a quiet, consistent way. The slow-to-warm advantage and the biology of shy temperaments. Biologists have observed bold and shy temperaments across many species, from fish to birds. The shy ones often survive new predators because they hesitate near novelty. The bold ones often find new food sources first because they approach novelty. That trade-off is the point. Different strategies win under different conditions. In psychology, a slow-to-warm child or adult may look cautious in unfamiliar social settings, but that caution can be protective. It reduces impulsive exposure to risk. It improves accuracy in reading new environments, and it creates a pattern of trust building that, while slower, can be remarkably stable. When you understand this, introversion becomes less like a limitation and more like a timing system, a mind that prefers to gather enough information before committing energy. This brings us to a role that is rarely celebrated loudly, but has always been essential: group cohesion and the quiet leader. Not all leadership is performed with volume. In many groups, the loudest voice sets direction, but the quietest presence often maintains cohesion. Evolutionary psychologists have suggested that introverted individuals may have been crucial in noticing the emotional weather of the tribe. Subtle resentment, quiet fear, someone being excluded, a conflict brewing under the surface. By forming deep one-on-one bonds, they acted as social glue, preventing fragmentation. Even today, you can feel this in families and teams. There's often one person who doesn't speak first, but who remembers what everyone needs. One person who senses when the room is tightening. Their leadership is not theatrical, it's stabilizing. And stability, especially in harsh environments, can be the difference between a group that survives and a group that splinters. In the long arc of history, this stability also supported something else: the accumulation of knowledge. Information accumulation and the librarian mind. Introverted traits are often associated with observation and reflection, and across human history, those traits helped build culture. Someone had to remember the seasons. Someone had to track patterns in animal movement. Someone had to refine tools slowly, patiently, noticing what didn't work and why. In a sense, introverts served as librarians of the tribe, keepers of detail, quiet recorders of what mattered. This doesn't mean extroverts didn't contribute to innovation. They often spread ideas, persuaded others, created momentum. But introverts frequently provided depth, the long attention needed for complex solutions. In modern terms, it's the difference between discovering a new concept and refining it into something reliable. During high-stress eras, famine, conflict, scarcity, these tendencies could become especially valuable. Risk mitigation and the pause-to-check reflex. In periods of danger, impulsivity can be costly. Extroverted novelty-seeking may encourage rapid action, sometimes heroic, sometimes risky. Introverted caution can encourage pause, scanning, and threat detection. Some researchers link this to heightened sensitivity in threat processing systems. In an ancient landscape, the pause-to-check reflex might mean noticing the unnatural quiet of birds, the shifted grass, the faint scent of smoke. It's easy to romanticize, but the basic principle remains. A cautious nervous system often detects anomalies. In modern life, this can show up as someone who catches a mistake in a contract, senses tension in a meeting, or notices patterns others miss. The same sensitivity that tires an introvert in a noisy cafe can make them exceptionally precise in a complex environment. And humans, unlike many species, can choose their roles with remarkable flexibility. The niche-picking hypothesis and the social ecosystem of roles. Humans don't just inherit temperaments, they also pick niches. Across development, people often gravitate toward roles that fit their nervous system. The diplomat, the scout, the craftsperson, the storyteller, the negotiator, the organizer. This specialization reduces competition within the tribe and increases overall resilience. If everyone tried to be the same kind of person, the social market would collapse. Too many chiefs, too few builders, too many performers, too few planners. Personality diversity makes the group more balanced. In a modern workplace, you can feel niche picking at play. Some people choose sales, others choose analysis. Some choose emergency response, others choose long-term strategy. It's not simply preference. It's regulatory fit, biology finding its best environment. Even sensitivity itself can be reframed as an advantage. Sensitivity as an early warning system. High sensitivity, often linked with introversion, may have offered early detection of toxins, illness, or environmental shifts. In a world without modern medicine, noticing subtle bodily cues mattered. A stronger physiological response to sensory input could act like a warning system. The same sensitivity that makes loud sounds unpleasant might also make spoiled food intolerable faster, or make weather changes more noticeable. In psychological language, what we now experience as overstimulation may once have been described simply as alertness, a mind that registers detail earlier and more intensely. This doesn't mean sensitivity is always easy. It can be exhausting in modern life, but it is not meaningless. It is a trait with roots, a pattern that persisted because it was useful often enough to remain. Even in reproduction, different strategies can coexist. Reproductive strategies: quantity, quality, and social visibility. From an evolutionary lens, extroverted traits may support social visibility, more connections, more opportunities, broader mate selection. Introverted traits may support depth, fewer partners perhaps, but higher investment, more careful selection, stronger bonding. Both strategies can succeed under different conditions. Again, the key word is diversity. Nature hedges its bets. In unstable environments, cautious investment can protect offspring. In expanding environments, social boldness can spread genes widely. Modern dating culture can make these differences feel like personal conflicts, but they may also be ancient patterns wearing modern clothing. And in the middle of the spectrum, there is another kind of survival tool: flexibility. The ambivert as a generalist bridge. Ambiverts, people closer to the middle, may have functioned as generalists. They could join explorers when needed and serve as sentinels when necessary. They could socialize for alliance building and withdraw for careful planning. This flexibility is powerful in changing environments where rigid strategies fail. In modern life, ambiversion often looks like someone who can handle a crowd for a while and then happily go home. Someone who can lead a meeting and also enjoy quiet work. Not because they are half of each type, but because their arousal regulation system can shift gears without too much friction. As human societies grew from small tribes to cities, culture began to shape which traits were praised. Cultural evolution and the shifting value of personality. When people lived in tight-knit groups, introverted vigilance and extroverted exploration both had obvious roles. But as societies industrialized, certain traits became marketable. In some Western contexts, extroversion started to look like competence: speaking up, selling yourself, performing confidence. In many Eastern contexts, restraint and quiet observation remained linked to wisdom and maturity. These cultural preferences can make the same nervous system feel celebrated in one place and misunderstood in another, which means a crucial thing for the sleeping mind to remember. Sometimes the discomfort you feel is not a personal defect. It is a mismatch between your biology and your environment's expectations. Chapter 4: Career, Creativity, and Leadership. Work is one of the most powerful environments for shaping how we see ourselves, not because it changes our biology, but because it rewards certain expressions of it. In many workplaces, the visible mind gets praised. The person who speaks quickly, networks easily, fills silence with momentum. But psychology tells a more nuanced story. Performance is not always about loudness. Often, it's about fit. And when introversion and extroversion are understood as different regulatory systems, the workplace becomes less of a competition and more of a choreography. Leadership styles and the proactive follower effect. Research by Adam Grant and colleagues at Wharton produced a quietly surprising finding. Extroverted leaders can sometimes perform worse when they manage proactive employees, people who bring ideas, initiative, and change. The theory is not that extroverted leaders are bad. It's that high social dominance can sometimes create unintentional competition, a tendency to protect one's own influence or talk over emerging ideas. Introverted leaders, by contrast, often excel in these settings because they listen longer, process more, and feel less threatened by someone else's initiative. Their leadership becomes a kind of spaciousness. They create room for other people's energy to become useful. In innovation-heavy environments, research, design, engineering, this can be invaluable. A leader who doesn't need to be the loudest signal in the room. Creativity also has a relationship with quiet. Flow state, deep work, and solitude as an amplifier. Flow is the state where attention locks in and the self-conscious mind fades. Time becomes smooth. Work becomes almost effortless. Introverts often reach flow more easily because their baseline already favors internal processing. Solitude for them is not emptiness. It is a clean surface for the mind to write on. Cal Newport's idea of deep work describes this focused, distraction-free concentration as a rare and valuable skill. In a world of constant interruption, the ability to sink into one task becomes a superpower. Extroverts can absolutely enter flow too, especially in interactive or high-stimulation work. But many introverts find that their best ideas arrive not in the middle of conversation, but afterward, when the mind has room to integrate. If you've ever had clarity while walking alone, or in the shower, or late at night, you felt this mechanism, the brain assembling meaning in quiet. And yet, workplaces often assume the best ideas are born in groups, loudly and quickly. The brainstorming fallacy and the quiet origin of good ideas. Group brainstorming is a cultural myth in many offices. Put smart people in a room, encourage free speech, and genius will appear. But psychological studies have repeatedly found that nominal groups, people generating ideas alone and then sharing, often produce more ideas and better ideas than live group sessions. In group settings, extroverts may dominate airtime, while introverts may hold back, not because they lack ideas, but because their ideas need a little incubation. Groupthink can also creep in. People unconsciously align with the loudest signal. When teams allow quiet ideation first, everyone's brain gets equal space. Then, when discussion begins, the room contains depth as well as momentum. In a sense, the best brainstorming often happens in silence before it happens out loud. This difference also appears in one of the most feared activities in modern professional life, public speaking. The public speaking paradox in performance as a controlled channel. It surprises many people to learn that some of the most powerful public speakers have been introverts. The reason is that introverts often treat public speaking as performance rather than socializing. They prepare intensely. They script. They refine. They use the prefrontal cortex like a sculptor uses a chisel, shaping a message carefully. On stage, the interaction is mostly one-directional, which can feel safer than unpredictable back-and-forth conversation. Afterward, many introverted speakers need solitude, not because they hated speaking, but because it cost energy. Extroverts may be energized by the applause and the mingling after the talk. Introverts may prefer to step backstage into quiet, letting their nervous system cool down. Both can be excellent. They simply recover differently. And when it comes to networking, the same principle of depth versus width quietly determines long-term value. The hidden networker and high-strength connections. Introverts often believe they are bad at networking because they don't enjoy collecting contacts. But networking is not only volume, it is bond strength. Extroverts may build broad networks quickly, creating many light ties. Introverts often build fewer ties but with more depth, remembering details, following up thoughtfully, writing messages that feel personal rather than automatic. Over time, these high-strength relationships can become remarkably durable. When opportunities arise, people often reach out not to the person they met once at a party, but to the person who made them feel understood. In this way, introverted networking can look invisible in the moment and powerful in the long run. Another domain where arousal regulation quietly shapes performance is finance and risk. Risk management in investing and the advantage of patience. High-stimulation environments, fast trading floors, constant news updates, crowds of opinion, often attract dopamine-seeking minds. Extroverted traits can thrive there: speed, decisiveness, comfort with noise. But long-term investing tends to reward something else: patience, analysis, resistance to social panic. Many highly successful investors exhibit introverted traits, not as a rule, but as a pattern often observed. Their pause-to-check reflex helps them ignore market hype, delay gratification, and make decisions based on quiet evaluation rather than emotional surges. In a world that confuses action with intelligence, this is an important reminder. Sometimes the best move is the calm one. And the modern office itself can be a hidden variable in performance. The open office cognitive tax and why quiet zones matter. We mentioned earlier how open offices can keep an introverted nervous system slightly braced. In career terms, this becomes a cognitive tax, not a dramatic breakdown, just a steady leak of attention. Each interruption forces the brain to switch context, which uses glucose and executive control. Over hours and days, this can translate into lower productivity and higher burnout risk. More companies now experiment with quiet zones, focus hours, or flexible remote work, not as comfort perks but as performance tools. When people have control over stimulation, they can do better work. Quiet is not laziness. It is a productivity environment for certain nervous systems. Meetings reveal another subtle mismatch: different sequences of thinking. Collaborative overload in the extrovert. Think out loud. Extroverts often process by speaking. They discover what they think by hearing themselves say it, adjusting in real time. Meetings can feel energizing because they are live laboratories. Introverts often process in the opposite order. They prefer to think first, then speak. For them, a meeting is where you go after you have finished thinking. This mismatch can create a painful illusion where introverts appear unprepared, when in reality they are simply being asked to perform their thinking in public. When workplaces share agendas in advance, allow written input, or build pauses into discussion, introverts often shine, bringing clarity and well-formed ideas. The room gets quieter and smarter. Some of the most effective leadership, too, happens through observation rather than projection. Leadership through reading the room. Introverted leaders often excel at reading subtle signals: fatigue behind a smile, tension in a team's silence, morale shifting after a policy change. Because they are not always filling space with their own energy, they can perceive the room more clearly. This kind of leadership is preventative. It notices problems early, before they become loud emergencies. Extroverted leaders can absolutely read rooms as well, but they may be more engaged in shaping the room through momentum. Both are valuable. One stabilizes through awareness, the other stabilizes through movement. And this brings us to a final workplace balance: the difference between acting quickly and understanding deeply. Action bias and reflection. Bias as two forms of intelligence. Extroverts often carry an action bias. When faced with a problem, they want motion, something to do, a step to take. In emergencies, this is priceless. Introverts often carry a reflection bias. When faced with a problem, they want understanding. Why is this happening? What are the hidden variables? For complex, long-term strategy, this is priceless. The healthiest organizations tend to balance these biases, pairing people who move fast with people who move wisely. In a way, the ideal leadership team contains both the engine and the map. Chapter 5: RareMindset and Emotional Intelligence. Relationships are where personality becomes tender. At work, differences can be managed with structure. At home, differences feel personal. An extrovert may interpret an introvert's need for solitude as withdrawal. An introvert may interpret an extrovert's need for interaction as pressure. But when you reframe both as arousal regulation, the conflict often softens into understanding. Because underneath most relational tension is a simple question: how do I feel safe and connected? Different nervous systems answer that question differently. Complementary attraction and nervous system balance. It's common to see introvert-extrovert couples in friendships. Psychologically, this can be a form of regulation through contrast. The extrovert invites the introvert into novelty, new places, new people, new experiences, often stimulating dopamine pathways and expanding the introvert's world gently. The introvert provides a safe harbor, depth, steadiness, quiet attention, often supporting calm and reflection, a kind of acetylcholine comfort. Together, they form a two-part system. One looks outward for opportunity, one looks inward for meaning. When it works well, each becomes the other's balancing force. When it works poorly, each feels misunderstood. The key is not changing types. It's respecting recovery styles and learning that love sometimes looks like giving someone the environment their nervous system needs. Conflict reveals these differences sharply. Conflict processing, discharge versus retreat. In arguments, extroverts often want to talk immediately. The conversation helps them discharge emotional energy. Silence can feel like abandonment or escalation. Introverts may do the opposite. They go quiet not to punish, but because emotional intensity overwhelms processing. Their nervous system can flood. Words become difficult. They may need time to retreat, downshift, and organize thoughts before re-engaging. This is sometimes misread as stonewalling, but in many cases it's overstimulation. When partners understand this, they can create a bridge, a pause with a promise. I need 20 minutes to settle, and then I will come back. That promise turns retreat into safety rather than threat. It protects both people from saying things their nervous systems don't truly mean. This is also why introverts are often described as good listeners, and why that's more than a compliment. Listening versus hearing, and the internal mapping of meaning. Introverts often listen by building an internal model of what you're saying. They don't just register words, they connect them to patterns. Your history, your tone shifts, the emotion under the sentence. Neurologically, their tendency toward internal processing can make their listening feel slow but deep, like water soaking into soil rather than splashing off stone. Extroverts may listen in a more interactive way, offering immediate feedback, nods, interjections, shared stories. Both forms can be caring. But the introvert style often produces nuanced empathy, the feeling that someone truly absorbed you. And for many people, being absorbed like that is profoundly calming, because it signals attunement. A crucial clarification here protects many people from unnecessary shame. Social anxiety versus introversion, not the same thing. Introversion is a preference for lower stimulation. Social anxiety is a fear of social judgment and can be intensely distressing. An introvert can be socially confident and still prefer quiet evenings. An extrovert can crave people and still fear rejection. Confusing these two creates harm. Introverts get pathologized as broken, and socially anxious extroverts get dismissed because they appear outgoing on the surface. Psychology encourages a kinder distinction. Your comfort with stimulation is not the same as your fear of evaluation. If you're introverted, you may simply be regulating arousal. If you have social anxiety, you may be managing threat perception. They can overlap, but they are not identical. This distinction gives people permission to accept their temperament without ignoring genuine struggles. It also explains a friendship pattern many introverts quietly cherish: the low-maintenance, friend and internal connection. Introverts are often comfortable with spacious friendships, relationships that don't require constant contact to remain real. They may go weeks without speaking, then reconnect as if no time passed. This can be misread as neglect, but often it reflects how connection is stored internally. Memory, emotional permanence, and stable attachment can keep the bond alive without frequent external reinforcement. Extroverts may prefer more frequent contact because the connection feels energized through interaction. Neither is wrong. They're different rhythms, and healthy relationships often form when people learn each other's rhythm the way you learn a favorite song, not forcing the tempo, just finding the beat that fits. Another rhythm difference appears in how strongly we absorb other people's emotions. emotional contagion, and the permeability of mood. Extroverts are often more susceptible to emotional contagion, the mood of the room entering them quickly. In a joyful crowd, they feel joy. In a tense room, they may feel tension. This sensitivity can make them powerful mood lifters because they amplify what they sense and reflect it back. Introverts sometimes maintain a stronger internal climate. They may be less quickly swept into group emotion, not because they are cold, but because their processing is more internal and filtered. Yet introverts can also feel emotions intensely, sometimes too intensely, especially when empathy is activated, which leads to a quieter, often misunderstood experience, empathy fatigue. The quiet empath, and why caring can require distance. Many introverts experience affective empathy strongly, feeling another person's pain almost as if it's happening inside their own body. This can be beautiful, but it can also overwhelm. When the emotional signal is too strong, the introvert may withdraw, not out of indifference, but because their nervous system lacks filters. The suffering becomes too loud. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as empathy fatigue, where caring consumes resources. In relationships, this can look confusing. The person who cares deeply also needs space. But in a compassionate frame, space is not the opposite of love. Sometimes it's what allows love to continue without burnout. And then there is the small talk issue again, because relationships often begin there. Phatic communication as social grooming, not meaningless noise. Hey, how are you? Busy day? Weather's crazy. These phrases can feel empty to an introvert, but social psychology frames them as phatic communication, signals that test safety, friendliness, and willingness to connect. For extroverts, this is the warm-up lap that creates rhythm. For introverts, it can feel like standing in static before the song starts. When introverts understand that small talk is not a philosophical discussion but a bonding ritual, it becomes easier to tolerate. And when extroverts understand that small talk can be draining, they can shorten it gently, offering more substance sooner. This is not about forcing anyone to change their nature. It's about building a shared bridge between two nervous systems. In many mixed groups, extroverts naturally become that bridge. The protective extrovert, and taking the floor as a gift. In social settings, extroverts often take the floor. They speak, initiate, keep conversation moving. Sometimes that's dismissed as attention-seeking, but it can also be protective. For an introverted partner or friend, an extrovert can act like a social buffer, absorbing some of the interaction load and creating breathing room. The introvert can observe, listen, and join when ready rather than being forced to perform continuously. This symbiosis often works best when it's conscious. The extrovert checks in, the introvert signals when they need a break, and both treat the evening like shared navigation rather than individual struggle. Finally, relationships reveal a subtle difference in how people seek reassurance. Validation needs, and the mirror of other minds. Extroverts often seek external validation to confirm their internal state, feedback, encouragement, visible response. It's not neediness, it's calibration. Introverts often rely more on internal validation, their own standards, their private assessment. This can be empowering, but it can also become a trap if the inner critic is harsh. Without external course correction, an introvert can spiral into self-doubt quietly. Healthy relationships recognize both systems. Extroverts learn to build a little inner steadiness. Introverts learn to accept reassurance without feeling weak. And both learn the same truth. Validation is not about control. It's about connection, two nervous systems helping each other find balance. Chapter 6. The ambivert spectrum and situational fluidity. Somewhere between the quiet shoreline of introversion and the bright open sea of extroversion, there is a wide, livable middle, and it's larger than many people assume. Most humans are not pure types. They are gradients. They are adjustable systems, sometimes social, sometimes solitary, depending on sleep, stress, purpose, and the emotional weather of the day. Psychology often uses the word ambivert for this middle territory, But it isn't a bland compromise. It's a particular kind of flexibility, like having a thermostat that can hold steady in different climates without working too hard. The ambivert advantage and the balanced nervous system. Researchers often describe ambiverts as people whose arousal regulation system doesn't lean strongly toward either dopamine-seeking stimulation or acetylcholine-driven calm. They can enjoy a lively room without feeling instantly flooded, and they can enjoy solitude without feeling instantly starved. This doesn't mean they never get tired or bored. It means their optimal zone overlaps with the average demands of many environments. In real life, this can look like someone who can mingle comfortably, then happily go home and read to someone who can speak up in a meeting, then focus quietly afterward. It's not indecision, it's range. And because they've experienced both sides, needing space and needing people, ambiverts are often observed to develop strong emotional intelligence, especially as mediators who can translate one nervous system's needs to another. Consider also a gentle metaphor. Ambiverts can feel bilingual. The bilingualism of personality and cognitive flexibility. Imagine personality as language. Extroverts often speak the language of external stimulation fluently, shorter processing loops, faster feedback, thinking through interaction. Introverts often speak the language of internal processing fluently, longer loops, deeper reflection, meaning building in silence. Ambiverts tend to switch between these languages with less friction. They can process through the quick, sensory route when needed, then shift into reflective depth when the moment calls for it. This flexibility can make them feel socially adaptive, like they belong in more than one world. And it can reduce extremes. They may be less likely to experience a severe introvert hangover, and also less likely to feel the sharp restlessness of prolonged isolation. Their mind has multiple doors and more than one way to breathe. Yet personality is not only about your baseline, it is also about the situation. Situational strength theory and how environments mask type. Psychologists talk about strong situations and weak situations. A strong situation is structured, rule-bound, socially scripted, like a funeral, a courtroom, a formal ceremony. In strong situations, almost everyone behaves more restrained, more careful, more introverted in expression. The environment pulls behavior into a narrow lane. A weak situation is open, ambiguous, unscripted, like a casual hangout at a park, an unstructured party, a long road trip with friends. In weak situations, people's natural preferences emerge more clearly. Ambiverts often glide between these contexts with less internal strain because their baseline is closer to the social average. Introverts may feel relief in strong situations because expectations are clear. Extroverts may feel constrained. In weak situations, extroverts may flourish, while introverts may need more intentional control over stimulation. This idea becomes especially vivid in performance roles, like sales and persuasion. The sales performance peak and the power of balanced output. A well-known study by Adam Grant found something counterintuitive. The best salespeople are often not extreme extroverts. They're frequently ambiverts who can be enthusiastic without overpowering, assertive without dominating, friendly without flooding the other person's space. They have enough extroversion to initiate and sustain momentum, but enough introversion to listen carefully and adjust. Sales, when done well, is not loudness, it's calibration. It's noticing micro-signals, interest, hesitation, confusion, readiness. Ambiverts often carry that balance naturally, making them responsive rather than forceful. In a quieter sense, this highlights a deeper truth about personality. Success often belongs to the mind that can regulate its intensity, not the mind that can maximize it. And sometimes, regardless of type, we behave out of character for something meaningful. Free trait theory and acting out of type for a core purpose. Psychologist Brian Little proposed free trait theory, which suggests we can temporarily adopt traits that don't match our baseline when we are serving a core project, something deeply important to us. An introvert might become boldly expressive while advocating for a cause, teaching a class, or protecting someone they love. An extrovert might become quietly disciplined while writing a book, caring for a family member, or training for a long challenge. This isn't fake, it's purposeful adaptation. But the theory includes a gentle warning: behaving out of type costs energy. The prefrontal cortex has to override natural impulses, and that effort is metabolically expensive. Afterward, we tend to need what Brian Little calls a restorative niche, a return to the environment that matches our baseline. For an introvert, that might be quiet and low stimulation. For an extrovert, it might be warm social contact and movement. This brings us to a concept that feels almost like relief when you first understand it: regulatory fit, and the feeling that life is easy again. When your environment matches your nervous system, tasks often feel smoother, not because life becomes perfect, but because you're no longer constantly compensating. This is regulatory fit. Introverts tend to feel fit in spaces that allow focus, autonomy, and controlled stimulation. Extroverts tend to feel fit in spaces that allow interaction, novelty, and visible feedback. Ambiverts often have a wider fit range, so they can feel right in more places without constant adjustment. If you've ever moved houses, changed jobs, or shifted friend groups and suddenly felt your shoulders drop for weeks at a time, you may have experienced regulatory fit. It wasn't magic. It was your nervous system finally living in an environment that spoke its language. Even so, one of the most important truths is that type is not a fixed stone. Introvert-extrovert fluidity, and the moving dot on the scale. Research suggests that our placement on the introversion-extroversion spectrum can shift depending on health, sleep, stress, and life circumstances. Think of your personality as a dot on a sliding scale rather than a permanent stamp. When you are tired, most people drift toward introversion, not as identity, but as energy conservation. The brain protects itself from overload when resources are low. When you are well-rested and safe, you may drift toward extroversion: more curiosity, more engagement, more willingness to interact. The key is not to panic when you shift. The shift is often a signal from the body: this is how much stimulation I can handle today. When you treat that message with compassion, you regulate faster. And in the background of all of this sits a quiet evolutionary theme: the stability of the middle and the resilience of the generalist. From a survival perspective, extremes can be brilliant, but the middle can be stable. Introverts may provide vigilance. Extroverts may provide exploration. Ambiverts may provide continuity, the ability to function in varied roles without burning out quickly. In changing environments, generalists can thrive. In modern life, that might look like someone who can collaborate when collaboration is needed, and then work alone when deep focus is required. Someone who can be social during holidays and still enjoy a quiet Tuesday. In a world that often pressures people to be one thing at all times, the ambivert reminds us: adaptability is also a form of strength. Chapter 7: Childhood Development and the LIFESBAN. Personality feels personal, like something we decided. But when you look closely, you can see the earliest outlines before language even fully forms. Developmental psychology suggests that temperament, your baseline reactivity and regulation, shows itself early, not as fate, but as a starting rhythm. Imagine a baby in a bright room, a sudden sound, a new face leaning close. One infant widens their eyes, kicks, cries, overwhelmed by the intensity. Another stares calmly, curious, almost amused. Both are healthy. Both are human. They are simply wired differently. Kagan's high-reactive infants and early sensitivity. In the 1980s, psychologist Jerome Kagan studied infants and found that high-reactive bobbies, those who responded strongly to novel stimuli like a popping balloon or a moving mobile, were more likely to become more cautious, more introverted adults. It's counterintuitive at first because we might assume strong reaction equals boldness. But in this context, strong reaction means sensitivity. The nervous system is receiving a powerful signal and responding with distress. Over time, many of these children become observant, careful, and slow to warm, not because they're fearful by nature, but because their biology registers novelty as high intensity. And when life is intense, caution can be a wise strategy. This is where a gentle, developmental metaphor becomes useful. The orchid and dandelion child. Developmental psychology sometimes uses the image of orchids and dandelions. Dandelion children tend to be resilient across many environments. They can thrive even when conditions are imperfect, more adaptable, less easily overwhelmed. Orchid children are more sensitive. In harsh conditions, they struggle more. But in the right environment, supportive, predictable, emotionally safe, they can bloom with exceptional depth, creativity, and insight. This metaphor isn't about labeling children as fragile. It's about understanding differential susceptibility. Some nervous systems are more affected by their surroundings, for better and for worse. When you raise a sensitive child with respect for their stimulation limits, while still encouraging gentle growth, you often see not weakness but remarkable refinement. As children become teenagers, biology stirs the waters in a dramatic way. Adolescent dopamine surges, and the temporary shift toward risk. During puberty, the brain's reward system becomes especially sensitive to dopamine. This is part of why adolescents can feel like a different personality is wearing your face. Even naturally introverted teens may seek social approval more intensely, take risks, chase novelty, and care deeply about peer perception. It's not always superficial, it's neurodevelopment. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, which supports impulse control and long-term planning, is still developing and continues maturing into the mid-20s. So you get a powerful engine with a still-growing steering system. Understanding this can soften judgment toward teenagers and toward your own past. The volatility wasn't just immaturity. It was a brain in construction, with reward circuits running hot. Over time, most people experience a mellowing that psychologists observe across cultures. The social maturation effect and the gentle drift toward introversion. As humans age, research often finds increases in agreeableness and conscientiousness, and a slight drift toward introversion in middle and older adulthood. This doesn't mean everyone becomes quiet. It means many people begin to prioritize quality over quantity, fewer, deeper relationships, more meaningful engagement, less hunger for constant novelty. Energy becomes more precious. The nervous system learns what is worth the cost. It's not sadness. It can be wisdom, selecting the people and activities that nourish rather than scatter. Many people also become less interested in social dominance and more interested in peace, mentorship, and stability. In a way, the lifespan itself teaches arousal regulation. And when it comes to what shapes personality, genetics matter, but not in the way many people think. Shared environments and the power of the non-shared path. Behavioral genetics suggests that genetics account for a significant portion of personality variation, often estimated around 40–50% in many studies. But what surprises people is that shared environment, like having the same parents, sometimes predicts less than expected. Instead, non-shared environment, unique experiences, different teachers, distinct friendships, specific life events, plays a powerful role. Two siblings can grow up in the same house and still become different people because they live different emotional lives inside that house. This is not a criticism of parents. It's a reminder that personality is a conversation between biology and personal experience. Your story matters. The moments that shaped you were specific. During childhood, the brain is especially plastic, which means early support can change outcomes dramatically. Neuroplasticity and gentle exposure, confident introverts, not fearful ones. A sensitive child doesn't need to be pushed into overstimulation, but they also don't need to be protected from life entirely. Research and clinical wisdom often emphasize gentle exposure, small, manageable challenges that teach the nervous system slowly, I can handle this. Over time, the amygdala can habituate. The child learns coping schemas, internal maps for how to enter a new situation, how to recover afterward, how to speak up when needed. They may remain introverted, but they become less afraid of their own sensitivity. This is a subtle but powerful distinction. Temperament stays, but confidence grows. And that confidence is often built through respect, patience, and gradual stretching, not through shamming. Schools, however, are not always designed for sensitive nervous systems. Goodness of fit in education and the hidden fatigue of performance. Many education systems reward quick speaking, constant participation, group projects, and noisy collaboration. For some children, that is energizing. For others, it is exhausting before learning even begins. A stimulus-sensitive child may spend so much energy monitoring social cues that little energy remains for the curriculum. This can look like daydreaming or lack of engagement, when it may be overstimulation. Psychologists sometimes emphasize the importance of goodness of fit, matching educational environments to a child's temperament. Quiet time, independent work options, and thoughtful participation structures are not special treatment. They are ways to let different nervous systems learn without chronic stress. Later in life, there is an evolutionary idea that frames aging as purposeful, not merely decline. The grandmother hypothesis and the shift from competition to mentorship. Evolutionary biologists have proposed that long human lifespans, including post-reproductive years, may have been adaptive because elders contribute through knowledge and care. In this view, the quieting of personality with age can be functional. Less need for dominance, more focus on observation, guidance, and stability. Older adults often become carriers of cultural memory, stories, skills, emotional regulation strategies. Introverted traits, reflection, patience, sensitivity to nuance, may become particularly valuable here. Even in modern families, you can feel it when an elder's presence calms a room. Their nervous system has learned slower rhythms, and those rhythms can spread gently to others. And by adulthood, many people experience a settling that feels like coming home. Identity consolidation and the relief of being yourself. By the 30s and beyond, many people report greater comfort with their temperament. The introvert who tried to force a party identity may begin to choose quiet evenings without guilt. The extrovert who feared silence may learn to enjoy pockets of solitude without panic. This identity consolidation often reduces internal conflict. And when internal conflict drops, stress physiology often softens too. Less cortisol spikes from constant self-override, more steadiness in daily life. It's a quiet kind of freedom, not becoming someone else, but finally cooperating with the nervous system you have. Chapter 8. The impact of modern technology and digital spaces. If ancient life shaped personality through forests, tribes, weather, and survival, modern life shapes personality through screens, notifications, infinite information, the constant possibility of contact. Technology doesn't just add convenience. It changes the energy exchange between people. It changes how often we regulate, how often we recover, and how often our nervous system stays slightly on, scanning for the next ping. And for introverts and extroverts, the digital world offers different kinds of relief and different kinds of strain. The digital inhibition effect and the shield of the screen. In face-to-face settings, introverts often process a flood of sensory data: eye contact, posture, microexpressions, timing, social risk. Online, much of that data disappears. The screen becomes a filter. Researchers sometimes describe a digital inhibition effect, where people feel less constrained online, more willing to share, more expressive, sometimes even more socially bold. For introverts, this can feel like finally being able to speak at the pace of their mind. They can craft words carefully, share deep thoughts, and build community without the immediate sensory load of physical presence. It's not that introverts become different people online. It's that the environment stops overwhelming their processing system, allowing their social depth to surface more easily. But the same digital world also plays directly with reward systems. The infinite scroll and dopamine loops. Social media platforms are designed around variable rewards, likes, comments, new content, unpredictable novelty. This design tends to stimulate dopamine-driven seeking behavior. Extroverts, often more responsive to reward and novelty, may find this especially compelling, a constant stream of social signals and stimulation. It can become a loop: check, refresh, react, repeat. Introverts may also get pulled in, of course, but many report a different sensation, less excitement and more noise. A crowded feed can feel like being stuck in a room where everyone is speaking at once. The mind becomes full. The nervous system gets peppered with microstimuli. The result, for many introverts, is digital burnout, not from lack of connection, but from too much fragmented connection. Sometimes, the digital world offers a softer kind of bonding that feels safe and one-directional. Parasocial relationships and safe connection without performance. A parasocial relationship is a one-sided bond with a public figure: YouTubers, streamers, authors, fictional characters. Research suggests these relationships can activate social brain networks in ways similar to real connection, while requiring far less energy. For introverts, parasocial bonding can feel soothing. You receive companionship, stories, emotional resonance, without needing to perform socially in return. There is no risk of awkwardness, no fear of misreading cues, no need to respond quickly. It can be comforting, especially during lonely periods. The important balance, of course, is remembering that it complements real relationships rather than replacing them entirely. But as a nervous system experience, it makes sense. Connection with low stimulation and low threat. Yet modern devices also carry a problem that older generations didn't face: the always-on exhaustion and the loss of the sanctuary. Before smartphones, home could be a true boundary. The social world stayed outside. Now it lives in your pocket, glowing on command. For many introverts, this means the nervous system never fully rests. Each notification can trigger a microspike of alertness, an invitation, a demand, a social possibility, a potential misunderstanding that needs resolving. Even if you don't respond, the nervous system registers the ping. Over time, this can keep the body in a mild state of scanning, like a guard who never gets to sit down. Extroverts can feel this too, but may interpret it differently, less as threat, more as temptation. Either way, the always available culture changes recovery. It makes regulation less automatic and more intentional. One reason texting feels easier for introverts returns us to the idea of time. Asynchronous communication and the comfort of processing space. Texting and email allow pauses, and pauses are where many introverted minds do their best work, choosing words, refining meaning, avoiding the pressure of instant response. This matches the longer processing routes we discussed earlier: language planning, evaluation, reflective integration. Asynchronous communication gives the brain time to run its full pathway without feeling trapped in real-time performance. Extroverts may find asynchronous contact less satisfying because it lacks the embodied feedback: tone, laughter, synchrony, warmth. For them, communication is not only information, it's energy exchange. And energy exchange is thinner through text. Video calls try to bring embodiment back, but they come with their own cognitive oddities. Zoom fatigue and the high cost of low-quality social cues. Many people, especially introverts, report that video calls are uniquely draining. On a screen, eye contact is unnatural. Either you look at the camera and miss the face, or you look at the face and miss the camera. There's also often a slight audio delay that the brain has to correct for. And when you're in a grid of faces, your mind tries to read everyone at once, but the cues are low resolution. For someone who naturally monitors social signals carefully, this becomes intense cognitive work. The brain strains to interpret tiny shifts. Is that person bored, confused, irritated, distracted? In a real room, the body reads these signals effortlessly. On a screen, the mind has to manufacture clarity from pixels. The result is fatigue that feels deeper than it should, because it's not just social, it's perceptual labor. And behind all of it, there is a sensory gatekeeper working overtime. Information overload in the thalamus as a gate. The thalamus helps filter sensory information before it reaches higher processing regions. In the digital age, we receive more input in a single day than many ancestors received in long stretches of time. News, messages, entertainment, ads, tasks. For stimulus-sensitive people, the gates can feel too open. The mind becomes saturated as if its buffer is full. This doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like numbness, irritability, difficulty concentrating, the desire to stare into nothing for a while. It's the brain's way of saying, no more input, I need integration. Introverts may experience this sooner because of their sensitivity to stimulation, but extroverts can experience it too when dopamine-seeking turns into compulsive consumption. Still, technology is not only a stressor. For many introverts, it has offered something precious. Online communities and the niche effect. Before the internet, niche interests could be isolating. If you loved rare poetry, obscure history, or a specialized craft, you might not find your people locally. Now you can. You can join communities built around depth rather than geography. This is a form of modern niche picking, social connection based on intellectual compatibility, which often feels less draining than generalized socializing. Introverts often thrive here because the interaction is focused, meaningful, and self-paced. Extroverts thrive too, often by energizing communities, hosting discussions, creating momentum. The internet at its best lets different personality systems meet in the middle, connection with choice. Yet the modern economy also creates a cultural pressure that can exhaust people. The influencer economy and performative extroversion. Digital culture often rewards being visible, being frequent, being on. High energy becomes currency. This can pressure introverts to perform extroversion to be noticed, hired, or valued. Even extroverts can burn out under the demand for constant output. The nervous system wasn't designed to broadcast endlessly. Performative extroversion, sharing more than you can recover from, can erode well-being over time. That's why many creators, regardless of type, eventually crave boundaries. Offline time, quiet mornings, slower schedules. Not as laziness, but as nervous system maintenance. And this is where a simple practice becomes meaningful for both ends of the spectrum. Digital detox as recalibration, not punishment. A digital detox isn't about rejecting technology. It's about restoring sensitivity. For extroverts, stepping away from constant stimulation can recalibrate dopamine thresholds, making ordinary life feel rewarding again. Walks, hobbies, face-to-face laughter. For introverts, detox often acts like a nervous system reset. Fewer micro-alerts, fewer fragmented demands, more uninterrupted calm. Even small boundaries, silent notifications, scheduled check-ins, phone-free meals, can reduce the background noise that keeps the mind partially awake. Research suggests that when input drops, integration rises. The brain processes, sorts, and settles, and that settling is one of the quietest doors into good sleep. Chapter 9: Cross-cultural perspectives and global norms. Personality is biological, yes, but the way personality is judged, rewarded, misunderstood, that part is often cultural. A nervous system can be born sensitive, and then spend a lifetime in a place that treats sensitivity like a defect. Another nervous system can be born stimulation hungry and grow up in a culture that treats expressiveness like immaturity. In both cases, the person may begin to feel there is something wrong with them, when what is really happening is simpler and more human. They are living inside expectations that were not designed for their baseline. So in this chapter, we step back and look at the map of the world. Not the political map, but the psychological one. A world where normal is not universal. A world where silence can mean respect in one place and awkwardness in another, and where your personality may feel lighter or heavier depending on where you stand. The Western extrovert ideal and the culture of personality. In many Western cultures, especially in the United States and parts of the UK, there has been a historical shift that psychologists and historians often describe as a movement from a culture of character to a culture of personality. In a culture of character, people were praised for inner virtue, integrity, restraint, discipline, moral steadiness. But in a culture of personality, outer charm becomes the spotlight. Being confident, being magnetic, being memorable, being seen. This is where the so-called extrovert ideal takes root. Outgoing behavior starts to look like competence. Speaking quickly becomes associated with intelligence. Being comfortable in groups becomes associated with leadership. And over time, introverts in these cultures may absorb a quiet, corrosive belief. If I'm not loud, I'm less. Yet neuroscience has never found a simple link between loudness and ability. Often, what we call confidence is just comfort with stimulation, and what we call leadership is sometimes just visibility. When you look at this through an arousal regulation lens, you can almost feel the misunderstanding. The introvert is not broken. They are simply being evaluated by an environment that rewards a different baseline. This brings us to cultures where silence is not treated as a problem to solve. Quiet cultures of the East and the beauty of restraint. In many East Asian cultures, such as Japan and South Korea, there is a long-standing respect for restraint, for thinking before speaking, for harmony, for not imposing your emotional weather onto others. In these environments, speaking less can be interpreted as maturity. Silence can be interpreted as depth, and caution can be interpreted as wisdom. For an introverted nervous system, this can feel like finally exhaling in public. The social world does not demand constant output. The baseline arousal of public life is kept lower through shared norms. And extroverts in these cultures can still thrive, of course, but they may learn a different kind of skill. How to hold their energy without releasing it instantly. How to sense timing. How to let the group breathe. This cultural difference teaches something very soothing. What you call social anxiety might sometimes be a mismatch between your biology and your culture's rules. Not always and not entirely, but often enough to matter. Now there are places where even in the West, the social atmosphere feels quieter by design. Scandinavian privacy norms and lagom as a social nervous system. In Scandinavian countries like Sweden and Finland, there are strong norms around personal space and not bothering others. Silence on a bus is not necessarily awkward. It can be respectful. Privacy is not treated as suspicious. It's treated as a boundary that everyone deserves. Sweden has a cultural concept often translated as lagom, meaning just the right amount. Not too much, not too little. And in a way, lagom is an arousal regulation philosophy applied to society. Public life is not built to overwhelm. People speak with moderation. Physical space is valued. Overstimulation is quietly avoided. For many introverts, these environments can feel like regulatory fit at a cultural level. Your nervous system doesn't have to fight the current just to exist. And for extroverts, these environments can become an invitation to develop quieter strengths, patience, depth, and a tolerance for low stimulation without instantly reaching for distraction. Culture also shapes personality through a bigger dimension, whether a society prizes standing out or blending in. Collectivism, individualism, and the psychology of branding the self. In collectivist cultures, identity often leans toward the group. People may experience value through belonging, duty, contribution, and harmony. In such contexts, introverts can sometimes find it easier to exist without pressure to self-promote. You can be competent without constantly presenting yourself. Your worth is less dependent on performance and more dependent on participation in shared life. In individualist cultures, the pressure can flip. Everyone is expected to brand themselves, to speak up, to advocate, to market their strengths, to be memorable. Extroversion becomes socially useful because it fits the currency of visibility. Introverts may still succeed, but often by doing extra translation work, learning to communicate accomplishments without feeling inauthentic, learning to enter the marketplace of attention without burning out. This difference is not about which culture is better. It's about how cultural systems reward different nervous system strategies. And then there are cultures where social life is naturally high arousal, warm and vivid. Mediterranean high arousal norms and building islands of calm. In many Mediterranean regions like Italy, Spain, Greece, and parts of Latin cultures more broadly, social life often carries high arousal. Late-night dinners, overlapping conversations, expressive gestures, physical touch, frequent gatherings, a sense that life is lived out loud. For extroverts, this can feel like stepping into a river that carries you effortlessly. The world feeds your dopamine system without you needing to chase it. For introverts born into these cultures, the social tax can be higher, but many develop a particular kind of resilience. They learn to find islands of calm inside vibrant families. They learn micro-boundaries, stepping outside for air, helping in the kitchen where the noise is softer, talking one-on-one instead of across the table. This is a quiet talent, regulating yourself without leaving the culture you love. And it highlights something important. Introversion doesn't always look like solitude. Sometimes it looks like subtle regulation in the middle of a crowd. Migration, the bold gene, and the personality of nations. There is an intriguing hypothesis in genetic and cultural psychology. Migratory populations may have higher frequencies of certain novelty-seeking genetic variants, including the DRD47R variant often discussed in dopamine research. The idea is gentle and probabilistic, not deterministic. People who chose to leave their homeland, cross oceans, take uncertain risks, may have been more likely to carry and pass on traits associated with exploration. This may help explain why countries shaped heavily by migration and frontier history, like the United States, Australia, and Brazil, often develop cultural identities that celebrate boldness, ambition, and outgoing energy. Not because everyone in those countries is extroverted, but because the cultural story is written in the ink of exploration. And when that story becomes dominant, introverts living inside it may feel like they're off script, even when they are thriving quietly. Language itself also participates in this story because language is more than words. It is a template for social rhythm. Language and personality. Louder languages, quieter languages. Some languages require more social fillers than others. English, for example, has many softening phrases and conversational bridges. How are you? Nice weather. Oh wow, that's crazy. You know what I mean. These can help create warmth, but they also create output demands. Finnish, often described as more direct and less filler-heavy, can feel quieter. Japanese has nuanced politeness structures that can reduce blunt emotional display and often supports comfortable silence in certain settings. Research on bilingualism suggests that people can feel different in different languages, more extroverted in one, more introverted in another, not because your soul changes, but because the language carries a social posture. Some languages invite performance, others invite restraint. Your nervous system responds to that invitation. And in the digital age, a new kind of culture has begun to form, crossing borders quietly. The global introvert movement and cultural self-acceptance. Books like Susan Cain's Quiet have circulated worldwide, translated into many languages, helping people name something they felt but couldn't explain. The internet has allowed introverts and extrovert-valuing cultures to discover they are not alone, not broken, not defective, just differently regulated. This global introvert culture is not a rebellion against extroverts. It's a correction. It has influenced workplace policies in some places, with conversations about quiet work hours, flexible schedules, and the right to disconnect. When society changes its norms, individual nervous systems don't have to fight so hard for basic comfort. And even within a single country, geography can change the personality fit. Urban versus rural personality and the environment as a personality amplifier. Cities can be described as extrovert machines. High density, high noise, high novelty, constant micro-interactions. For some people, that feels like oxygen. For others, it feels like never-ending sensory input. Rural areas can feel like introvert sanctuaries. Lower noise, more predictable rhythms, fewer social demands in public space, more nature-based regulation. Studies suggest that people often self-select environments that match their temperament when they have the freedom to do so. When they don't, they may experience chronic low-level stress that disappears when the environment changes. Sometimes people interpret that stress as a personal weakness, but very often it's just a mismatch between baseline arousal needs and ambient stimulation. Your nervous system is not being dramatic, it is being honest. Culture also shapes what we fear socially, and even how we name that fear. Culture-bound anxiety and the lens of self versus other. In Western clinical language, social anxiety often focuses on fear of being judged, embarrassed, or rejected. In Japan, there is a culturally specific expression called teijin kaio fusho, often described as fear of offending or embarrassing others, fear that one's presence might disturb the group. This contrast reveals something subtle. The same biological arousal can be interpreted through different cultural lenses. In one culture, the fear is, they will think badly of me. In another, the fear is, I will harm their comfort. The nervous system activates, but the story it tells itself depends on social values. This is not just academic. It means self-compassion must be culturally aware. If you feel tense socially, it doesn't always mean your personality is wrong. Sometimes it means your culture trained your threat system to watch for different dangers. And with that understanding, we can step into the final chapter, where the goal is not to change who you are, but to live with your nervous system like you're on the same team. Chapter 10, OPTIMIZNG Life, Practical Mechanisms of the Mind. At the deepest level, personality science doesn't exist to label you. It exists to relieve you, to explain why certain environments drain you, why certain people energize you, why you need what you need. And when you understand your arousal regulation style, life becomes more negotiable. You stop forcing yourself to live like a different nervous system. You begin to design small, quiet supports that make your days smoother. None of what we explore here is a cure or a guarantee. People are complex. Life is complex. But research and lived experience often agree on one calming truth. When you treat your nervous system with respect, it tends to repay you with clarity. The restorative niche and the art of returning to baseline. Psychologist Brian Little describes the idea of a restorative niche, a place or practice that returns you to your baseline self. Think of it as a neurological home, a reset point. For an introvert, a restorative niche might be surprisingly small. A bathroom stall at a loud event, a quiet stairwell, a solo walk around the block, headphones with soft music, a few minutes of looking out a window without speaking. What matters is not the length. It is the drop in stimulation that allows your system to downshift. For an extrovert, a restorative niche may look different. A short voice note to a friend, a brief social chat, a shared coffee, a friendly group message, movement in a lively environment. The point is not distraction. The point is co-regulation and reward, lowering stress through connection. When you begin to treat these niches as maintenance rather than indulgence, you stop feeling guilty for needing them. You schedule them like you would schedule water breaks on a long hike. Not optional, just wise. This idea becomes especially practical at the threshold between work and home. The 20-minute reentry rule and the downshift from the day. Many introverts benefit from a transition period after high-demand days. A gentle practice some people call the 20-minute reentry rule is simply taking about 20 minutes of low stimulation before engaging socially at home. Silence, dim light, a shower, sitting in the car, a slow walk, a calm snack. What's happening here is not emotional distance. It's nervous system downgrading. The brain is shifting out of high alert mode and back toward resting state networks. Without this downshift, an introvert may appear irritable or shut down with loved ones, not because they don't care, but because they're still metabolically spent. Extroverts may benefit from a different transition, like briefly connecting with someone or doing a stimulating activity to release the day's tension. The principle is the same. Acknowledge that your nervous system doesn't teleport between modes. It transitions. And if transitions are real, then so is planning, even for people who love spontaneity. Scheduled spontaneity and feeding the reward system on purpose. For extroverts, the dopamine hunger for novelty can sometimes lead to impulsive decisions that create stress later. It's often helpful to treat stimulation like nutrition. Plan it, portion it, enjoy it fully. Scheduled spontaneity is the practice of creating intentional spaces for high-energy experiences, so your reward system gets fed without hijacking your responsibilities. For introverts, scheduling social events can be just as useful for a different reason. When you can anticipate stimulation, you can allocate energy. You can prepare. You can create recovery time afterward. The event becomes less like an ambush and more like a chosen experience. This is not about becoming rigid. It's about reducing nervous system surprise, which is often what makes social life feel harsh. Once you start seeing invitations as energy transactions, a single word begins to carry enormous power. The power of no as an active nervous system budgeting. For many introverts, saying yes is expensive. Every yes is not just time. It is stimulation, output, self-monitoring, recovery. When people begin to see social commitments as energy transactions, no becomes less of a moral failure and more of a budget decision. Research on boundaries and well-being consistently suggests that overcommitment increases stress. And with stimulus-sensitive nervous systems, the stress can appear earlier. Saying no kindly and clearly is one of the simplest forms of self-regulation. For extroverts, no can also be powerful, especially when social life becomes compulsive. Not every invitation is nourishing. Some are just noise. Learning to choose quality connection over constant connection can prevent dopamine chasing from turning into burnout. In both cases, boundaries are not walls, they are gates. They help you decide what enters. And just as introverts can stretch towards social bravery, extroverts can stretch towards stillness. Quiet training for extroverts and building tolerance for low stimulation. Mindfulness, meditation, slow hobbies, nature walks, breath-focused practices. These are often discussed as universally good, but they may serve extroverts in a specific way. Building tolerance for low stimulation without instantly labeling it as boredom. From a neuroscience perspective, quiet practices may strengthen pathways associated with calm focus, often linked to acetylcholine-driven states. Extroverts may learn that solitude is not emptiness. It is a different kind of richness, a quieter reward system, one that doesn't require applause or novelty to feel alive. This doesn't mean extroverts should become introverts. It means they can broaden their regulation toolkit, so that on days when social reward is unavailable, the nervous system still has a way to settle. For introverts, one of the most powerful tools is also prefrontal, also gentle and surprisingly practical. Pre-game mental simulation and moving fear from the amygdala to the cortex. Introverts often feel most stressed before an event, not during it. The mind simulates uncertainty. The amygdala dislikes unknown variables. A simple technique is mental simulation. sometimes called pre-gaming without substances. You imagine the environment, plan a few conversation starters, choose a safe exit strategy, decide how long you'll stay. This does something subtle. It moves the event from vague threat to structured scenario. The prefrontal cortex begins to hold the map, and the amygdala calms because it senses preparation. This is not about scripting your soul. It's about giving your nervous system a handrail. Sleep in the spectrum. Why rest changes your type temporarily. Earlier, we spoke about the moving dot on the personality scale. Sleep is one of the strongest forces that moves it. When sleep debt accumulates, the brain becomes less tolerant of stimulation. Everyone slides toward introversion under fatigue because the metabolic cost of processing becomes too high. Introverts sometimes become night owls because the night is quiet and free of social demands. It can feel like the only time the world matches their baseline. But the trade-off is that sleep loss increases reactivity the next day, making the world feel even louder. It's a loop many people recognize. Research consistently suggests that adequate sleep supports emotional regulation, attention, and stress resilience. So if you are trying to be more socially capable or simply more peaceful, sleep is often the first lever to adjust. Not as a strict rule, but as a kindness to your nervous system. And when you want to be social but you feel shut down, there is a small, elegant method that respects the body's resistance. The 5-minute social rule and the gentleness of permission to leave. Sometimes the hardest part of socializing is the beginning, anticipatory arousal spikes. The doorway feels heavy. A simple approach is the 5-minute rule. Commit to 5 minutes only, not the whole evening, not the whole event. Just 5 minutes of presence. Often the body discovers that the feared intensity levels out through habituation. The nervous system adjusts. The room becomes familiar. And if after 5 minutes it still feels too much, you allow yourself to leave without shame. Because you did the experiment. You gathered data. This is self-trust in action. A nervous system learns fastest when it feels safe, not forced. Now, whether in love or work, one of the most stabilizing ideas is that mixed types create balanced systems. The beauty of mixed teams and complementary regulation. In a partnership, an extrovert may handle the width of life, introductions, social logistics, momentum, new experiences. An introvert may handle the depth, reflection, emotional nuance, careful planning, meaning-making. In a workplace, extroverts can energize, connect, sell, initiate. Introverts can analyze, refine, detect risk, maintain quality. The healthiest teams do not try to make everyone the same. They build a nervous system ecosystem. People who push forward, people who check details, people who keep morale steady, people who explore, people who protect. When this is respected, personality differences stop being irritations and start being architecture. And now, as we reach the end of this long drift through psychology, there is one final idea that matters more than any model. Self-compassion and the biology of self. Your personality is not a moral achievement. It is not a failure. It is not a test you pass by being louder or quieter. It is a biological system trying to maintain optimal arousal. If you are introverted, you are not antisocial. You are stimulus-sensitive, often thoughtful, often deep, often built for precision and meaning. If you are extroverted, you are not shallow. You are stimulation-seeking, often resilient, often connective, often built for momentum and social reward. If you are an ambivert, you are not indecisive. You are flexible, adaptive, and often skilled at translating between worlds. And all three are evolutionary success stories. Different answers to the same ancient question. How do I stay regulated, safe, and alive in a complex world? So tonight, as your mind begins to loosen its grip on wakefulness, you can let this understanding settle like a warm blanket, not as a label, as permission. Permission to recover the way you recover. Permission to choose the environments that fit you. Permission to stop apologizing for your baseline. And if sleep is still arriving slowly, that's fine. You don't need to chase it. Let the information fade into the background. Let your breathing become the main story again.